With, on the one hand, an appreciation for all of you who have stuck it out in this heat, which was not part of our planning, but we've had three absolutely fantastic panels, and I think that helps. Just to say that I think for many of us, when we were coming up, when we were young and trying to turn the world upside down and doing our best at that, we didn't think of ourselves as youth, we thought ourselves as the organizers. And I think that's how we need to be working with the people on the last panel. I want to again take a moment to thank Jonathan Fluck, who was not here when we wanted to thank him before, for the work that he's done in making this possible. And I don't know if you've been noticing, but there's two people in this room who've been working harder than anybody else. And so I want to thank Rieko Asato and Emi Hirano, who have been interpreting for our Japanese friends and partners. So just to thank them. And then I want to just take a moment to emphasize, if you will, the seriousness of the moment. I think we've all been encouraged by the ban negotiations, by the number of countries who have come together, by the humanitarian pledge, by the humanitarian consequences conferences, but to appreciate that as we meet here, all options are on the table in relationship to North Korea. A new book has just come out called The Thucydides Trap, which is about the historic patterns of conflicts between rising and declining powers and the pressures between the United States and China, not to mention the madness that we have now between the United States and NATO on one hand and Russia on the other. So we need to understand that we're meeting in the context of a dangerous situation, one that has parallels even to the period leading before World War I, which, because of time considerations, I won't run down, but happy to talk with you otherwise. So just to introduce this panel, as we come to thinking about the ban and what is beyond, to appreciate, in a sense, why we have the ban negotiations going on now, to remember the outrage of not only people across the grassroots of the world, but also governments who have been victimized by nuclear threats and by the insistence on the maintenance of nuclear apartheid. The failure of the nuclear weapons states to fulfill their commitments under Article 6 of the NPT after more than 40 years. So some of you who were at the Human Consequences conferences have seen the absolute rage and incomprehension of many of the diplomats from other countries. And it is this combination of the civil society movements and these outraged governments that have brought us through the Human Consequences conferences, the humanitarian pledge, the open-ended working group, and now these negotiations that will lead to a treaty in July. And I think for one of the challenges for us will be on the other side of that treaty, and to appreciate that we're going to have to respect that in different countries we're going to have different responsibilities while we're still all part of the same movement. So on the one hand, there will be those non-nuclear weapons states who signed the treaty, and for them the challenge will be to get their governments to follow through and ratify, and to understand that that ratification process will also help the movement. To understand that in the nuclear weapons umbrella states like Japan and the NATO countries, the pressure there is going to be to use this opportunity to push their governments to join in the common sense and the sanity of the rest of the world, and to sign and to ratify. And in that process to, if you will, strip some of the countries that undergird and support the nuclear architecture and the threat of annihilation, to strip them off and further delegitimize nuclear weapons and preparations for nuclear annihilation. And finally, you know, there's us in the nuclear nine, where they haven't participated, they've boycotted, they are, all of them, spending billions and billions, in the United States more than $1 trillion, in preparations for nuclear war, right? And so our responsibility is to build that common movement that we've been talking about all day, to push to actually get our governments to operate in ways that affirm life rather than threaten human existence. So with that, I'm going to shut up and move to introduce our speakers. I'll do it one at a time. And I'm really thrilled. I mean, on the one hand, I'm thrilled to see many friends here from the United States, the other movements, and Japan, but also thrilled, and I'm looking for one of our speakers here. Where's Takai-san? Okay, behind to my side. All right, I'm looking over here. So we're going to start with Arielle Denis, and Arielle is now acting as consultant on peace and disarmament issues for several peace organizations, including the International Peace Bureau, which I'm also privileged to work with. She was the campaign director for International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa until March of 2016. And previously she served as the co-chair of Le Mouvement de la Paix, the French peace movement, for 10 years. With a background of studies in international and strategic affairs, she is a journalist and has written many articles, books, and essays, as well as produced documentaries on peace and disarmament issues. Arielle, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Oh, okay. I could not find the printer, so I got to get this to read. Anyway, so first, I'm very happy to be here, and I thank all of you, the organizers, Joseph and everybody, to organize this very interesting, so far, forum. So, yeah, what about the movement afterwards? And I had the same kind of sentence, and I think a lot of big brains have come to the same conclusion. Mine was from Noam Chomsky to start with, and he said that there are two major direct threats to humankind or human survival: climate change and nuclear weapons. And I think that's really what we all feel. And for sure, the withdrawal of the US from the Paris Agreement is not a good news. The fight against climate change needs a lot more serious commitment and action from governments and companies, but there is a widespread conscience that things must change and that we need to act, and if we want this planet and the future generation to survive. But regarding nuclear weapons, both the dangers that they pose and the solutions to get rid of them are widely ignored and underestimated. So what's happening since March this year is the most significant positive change in nuclear politics since the Test Ban Treaty in 1996. It is also an historical challenge and a victory against the most powerful nuclear-armed countries, organized by the majority of governments from the South and civil society negotiating this convention to prohibit nuclear weapons. Of course, nuclear weapon states have done their best so far to prevent this convention to occur. After trying to ignore the humanitarian initiative as much as they could, they pressured their allies and friends. They defamed the ban, they cut the funding for NGOs, and they boycott the negotiations. But despite all these maneuvers, we are almost there. Many of you have contributed to this achievement. And although the text of the treaty is still under discussion, I think we can already celebrate it and congratulate ourselves before looking ahead. So thank you everybody to have participate and contribute to come that far to this treaty. So it might be interesting to give a close look to what is happening here and how the nuclear armed states have been challenged in the heart of their comfort zone, where their power is the most symbolically and concretely expressed, the nuclear weapons. We have challenged the ability of a few to decide a global genocide and ecocide. We have broken the status quo that blocked each positive move since 30 years. This fight is a result of the combination of committed civil society organizations, especially those coming from nuclear-free zones and the non-aligned movement, and several brave European states like Austria and Ireland. They have united in what's been called the humanitarian initiative, and in several years the debate on nuclear weapons has been reframed as a threat to human security for all with catastrophic humanitarian consequences. And if we get the treaty by July 7th, and I'm confident we will get there is a new political space to build an irresistible momentum toward the total elimination of nuclear weapons. And I think, as citizens, we should work along these lines. The first one is still spread the word about the humanitarian consequences on which the Ban Convention is deeply rooted. 2, bring together a broad movement with organizations and individuals who care for this planet. And 3, put the shame and the pressure on the countries who refuse to quit their weapons, which are banned by the rest of the world, and go to zero. So the humanitarian consequences, I think, is the first stone on which we can build a lesson for the future. The humanitarian concern and human security is a political space where we can unite and win the fight. It has been the case for all weapons that have been banned and eliminated so far. So move the focus from a security for few privilege to the global human security consideration. And I believe this is what we should do in the next period. Open the eyes of the people on the simple facts and findings that the humanitarian initiative has developed and deepened through the last 7 years, and spread the message such as there is no national or international institution able to rescue victims and heal the sufferance in case of a nuclear explosion. The human, environmental and economical consequences will be dramatic and will not stop at the border. 2, if there was even a limited war of 100 nuclear weapons, if they were brought, let's say, between India and Pakistan, for example, there will be a drop in temperature due to the smoke and beyond the direct millions of victims, a terrible famine would probably kill 1 to 2 billion people. Third, there are 1,000, it's very warm here, there are 1,800 nuclear weapons on high alert permanently turning around, and 15,000 in silos. The risk of an accidental explosion is rising, and it is just pure luck if no dramatic accident has occurred so far. So let's speak about the effects. Most people ignore or have forgotten what a nuclear weapon is. Say how women are more affected by radiation. Explain that if there is a nuclear war, the most poor, once again, will be the first affected. Give the floor to nuclear weapon survivors from Japan and other regions affected by nuclear tests. Speak about the risk of accidents, the terrifying findings about cyber risk, for example, or accidents or near misses that could have led to catastrophe. 2, let's bring together the big movement. We can build a majority. We have clearly exposed the problem with the humanitarian consequences. Now we have the solution. Let's eliminate the weapon. So many people can get excited again with this new step, and we need them to push this issue forward. We need to create or recreate a strong, dedicated movement involving all people of goodwill. The ones shocked by injustice of the nuclear apartheid, or by the terrible waste of resources that nuclear weapons represent, or by the human rights threat that these weapons are. Let's bring in the climate change and environmental movements, the trade union movement, the women's organization, human rights, indigenous people movement, etc., like yesterday at the march. I wish to quote a new paper from the Canadian International Disarmament Institute, who goes through the Sustainable Development Goals and see how this works with the Draft Ban Convention. For example, the general obligations in Article 1 outline the core prohibitions of the draft, including prohibition on production, transfer, stockpiling, testing and use. These prohibitions are aimed at preventing future nuclear weapons explosion and related casualties, humanitarian harm and environmental harm. I can't say environmental. A number of SDGs have direct connection, particularly SDG 3, ensure healthy life and promote well-being for all at all ages. SDG 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water, etc., etc. So The third point is put the shame on the guilty countries who refuse to quit the weapon that is banned by the rest of the world and for them to quit their deadly addiction. The ban convention will provide a clear international rejection from the majority of countries with the stamp of illegality, saying that nuclear weapons are clearly inhumane and are the weapons of mass destruction and those that cause as other weapons of mass destruction and those that cause unacceptable harm. The ban convention will make it much more uncomfortable for governments to justify their reliance on the weapons. They all pretend that they want a world free of nuclear weapons, so do it. They can join the treaty, or they will have to explain clearly that they take responsibility to be accomplice of a genocide and an ecocide. The humanitarian initiative and the ban convention negotiation have already clearly affected the nuclear weapon states and their allies. Parliaments have encouraged governments to participate in the negotiations in Spain, Netherlands, Norway, and even the European Parliament passed a bill. The debates clearly affect at the highest level the UK politics with the links with the Scottish independence. Yeah, you made a comment, and I'm sure you can make another comment on that, Dave. Several polls in NATO countries show a massive support from the people to join the convention. So we need to provide these people the tools to express themselves and push their government to join. Although we don't know what will be the final text, we can use all its assets to stigmatize nuclear weapons, especially in umbrella states. A fruitful campaign stigmatizing the financial institution that invest in nuclear weapons production, called Don't Bank on the Bomb, is a great tool to mount up the pressure among clients of banks and pension funds. Cities can also play a major role. A few months ago, Mayors for Peace US conference unanimously adopted a resolution calling the next US president to pursue diplomacy with other nuclear armed states, participate in negotiations for elimination of nuclear weapons, cut nuclear weapon spending, and one of the mayors I think the conference commends mayors Denis Simons and the Cambridge City Council for demonstrating bold leadership at the municipal level by unanimously deciding on April 2 last year to divest their $1 billion city pension fund from all companies involved in production of nuclear weapon systems and in entities investing in such company. What a fantastic example we can help our cities to follow. So the humanitarian initiative has already revitalized people's movement to abolish nuclear weapons all around the world. The pressure will surely be high to pressure countries from joining the convention, but a new global movement is born, and together with friendly governments, international organizations such as the Red Cross, trade union, human rights, etc., religious movements, we can make peace great again. Thank you.
Thank you, Arielle. I have really a great pleasure in introducing our next speaker, Hiroshi Takai, who I've been privileged to work with for about 30 years. Just to appreciate somebody who does extraordinary work, both in helping to nurture and grow grassroots movement and integrating that while working with diplomats and working with sympathetic governments. It's really quite remarkable. Takai is Representative Director, formerly the General Secretary of Gensuikyo, the Japan Council Against Atomic and Hydrogen Bombs. Prior to serving as the General Secretary, Takai was Gensuikyo's International Secretary. In his youth, we once were young, he represented the Japan Democratic Youth League in Europe, Vietnam, and other nations. Takai was born at the end of World War II, and just like many other people, he joined in the student movement in the first half of the 1960s. Then the youth movement in the second half of the second decade. And in the 1970s, he visited many countries, such as Vietnam, during the period of truce in 1973. He visited Chile in the period of the Allende government in 73 and other countries. He began to work in the National Office of Gensuikyo in 1984 and met many leading peace activists in Japan and overseas. From 1987 until early 2000, he was Assistant General Secretary, and then in February 2000, he was appointed to the post of Secretary General. In 2011, he ostensibly retired from his leadership role to become the representative director and co-chair of Gensuikyo, where he still plays a leading role. Thank you, Taka, for joining us.
Thank you for the introduction. Oh, sorry. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you for the introduction. Yesterday, I walked in a heavy rain with you, and I discovered again that the United States has two different faces. 30 years ago, I joined your peace march, Continental Walk. At that time, too, I found that there were two different faces. One face seems to be more aggressive and arrogant, but the other face is far more gentle, peace-loving, and friendly to the world. I'm glad that now, this time, many Japanese joining in a peace march yesterday found and came to the same conclusion that you have a wonderful face in the United States. Yesterday, in the park, before the march, we divided ourselves into several groups and we collected signatures. I discovered another thing. More people in the United States gave their signatures for the appeal from Hibakusha, far more than we collected in Japan. Yeah. So, despite all turns and twists, world is changing, and world is more and more driven by the people like you. And so does the disarmament move in international politics. Our organization was founded in 1955, 10 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Shortly after, the hydrogen bomb test at beginning. More than half of the Japanese signed a petition demanding the total abolition of nuclear weapons in those days already. And then in 1955, we held the first World Conference against the energy bombs. But why 10 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki? The reason is Japan was placed under occupation for 7 years. Anything to report about Hiroshima and Nagasaki was prohibited. The Allied forces leader, American military leader, declared that all those who should die because of the radiation have already died. So, no assistance was given to the Hibakusha. No report was given. All documented materials, photos were confiscated. Simply, the damage was made secret. It was 12 years after the bombing. For the first time, Hibakusha got the first aid, but too late. In the most difficult time for Hibakusha, losing any relatives on whom they could rely, died. They lost houses, they lost the means to live at a time when they needed real help. No help was given by the Allied forces, nor Japanese government. Only grassroots helped. This is not subject I speak now, but something important is that for peace movement, for our movement, it is essential to make known the truth about the damage that took place under the mushroom cloud, not over the mushroom cloud. That is what we have been engaged for more than 60 years, to make known the truth, statements and the testimonies of Hibakusha to the world and to the present generation, and should be given to the next generation. In a more fashionable way, we say, to make known the humanitarian consequence. Now things are changing, apparently changing. I'm glad that I took part in a conference of the United Nations in March, and now overwhelming majority governments now speak in the same language as we do. They say humanitarian consequence. They give their priority to Hibakusha to speak. It's really wonderful. And when I saw their draft text of the treaty, it was truly moving for us. The first paragraph says there should never be nuclear weapons used again. That is what we said 62 years ago, in some other words, saying that prevention of nuclear war. That's the same thing. And in the Article 1, it says it should ban development, manufacturing, possession, and the testing, as well as the use of nuclear bomb. That's what we said, in some other words, saying a total ban and elimination of nuclear weapons. And Article 5 recognizes the need to help Hibakusha under humanitarian law. That's what we say, the relief and solidarity with Hibakusha. Those things for which we have worked for more than 60 years are now coming to the top of the international politics to be realized. That's a change we are facing. So we should grasp this opportunity, use it, and to bring the world to a true change, to set the world free of nuclear weapons. I think it is possible. Some say that it's just nonsense because nuclear weapon states none of the nuclear powers are in the negotiations. I think that is wrong. That opinion does not really understand the true meaning of democracy. In international politics, Pan Ki-moon several years ago said, democracy is coming up in the international disarmament efforts. Majority speaks for the abolition of nuclear weapons. And that majority came to decide the major direction of the human race to move. December last year, yes, United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution. But 2 months before, the first committee decided. At that time, already 123 voted in favor, and 38 voted against. 38 against opposition is too many. But I tried to analyze and found that of 38, 25 are members of NATO. 4 such countries as Japan, other allies, and Russia, and its ally one. Almost all are often working with the decision made in Washington, D.C. So in the world, actual fact is that in the American continent, there are only 2 countries that really opposed United States and Canada. In the Pacific, once called as the American leg, only 2 countries opposed to a keyword, Australia and Micronesia. Even in the largest continent in Asia, only 2 countries opposed. Do you know what it is? What country it is? Japan, South Korea. And only one in the Middle East and 0 in Africa. That's a reality. We can change the world. But most important thing is to change our own country. It is really frustrating to see that Japan, the only able country, the government is opposing on the pretext using Korea and China as pretext to oppose nuclear disarmament. But I assure you that Japan is also changing. Look at Okinawa. And that on that island, all people, all political forces come to oppose the military base. And the governor, formerly he was conservative, but undaunted. All Okinawa, they call. All Okinawa are now struggling to remove the base, wanting Okinawa to become a bridge between Japan and the other Asian countries. And that is coming to the whole of Japan. Now, almost all opposition parties, can you believe Democrats, Social Democrats, Communist, Liberal, all now came to be united to defend Article 9 to abandon the war as a means to resolve international conflict. Arielle said, yes, July 7th, the international community will adopt the treaty. Now the focal point will come to each individual country, whether the government will sign and ratify the treaty. That is where the sovereign people should work harder. So the last thing I should say is we will do our responsibility as the only bound country. We will increase our efforts to make known further the truth of the, or rather consequence, humanitarian consequence, if the bomb is used. And one more thing, we assure you that, like our friends, British friends, we will do our best to change our own country. 7 years ago, we were told by then Secretary General Pan Ki-moon, who said in the Riverside Church, we will change the world into nuclear weapon, to nuclear weapon free. Nuclear weapon free world is already on the horizon. I ask you to vote your own government. World will finally change. Then the world will thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Takai. You know, and for those of us who are in the United States and sometimes, you know, in this depressing bubble that we're in, you know, I think just really appreciate both Arielle and Taka's words and, if you will, the picture of what the rest of the world looks like and what their expectations are, and to, I think, carry with us the words of we can change the world. I also want to say that the U.S. Declaration of Independence says that King George kept among us standing armies in times of peace that committed abuses and usurpations. That necessitated a declaration of independence from Britain. And then to appreciate that the United States has militarily colonized Okinawa, Japan as well, but especially Okinawa, since 1945. The people live under still functionally a military government enforced by Japan and the United States. And so for those of you who have not picked up the literature on the table over here about Okinawa, I would strongly encourage you to do so. Then to say that one of the unanticipated privileges of doing the work and organizing and campaigning that we do is, you know, the people that we get to meet along the way. And one of them is John Burroughs, who I've been privileged to work with now for a number of years. John is the Executive Director of the Lawyers Committee on Nuclear Policy, based here in New York. He represents the Lawyers Committee in nuclear non-proliferation treaty review proceedings, in the UN otherwise, and other international forums. He was a member of the Marshall Islands International Legal Team, talk about internationalism, in its nuclear disarmament cases before the International Court of Justice. His publications in which he's been a contributor include Unspeakable Suffering, The Humanitarian Impacts of Nuclear Weapons, Assuring Destruction Forever, Nuclear Weapon Modernization Around the World. He's the author of The Legality of Threat or Use of Nuclear Weapons, a guide to the historic opinion of the International Criminal Court of Justice. And he also has published articles and op-eds in journals and newspapers, including the Fordham International Law Journal, the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist, Arms Control Today, the World Policy Journal, and Newsday. He has taught international law as an adjunct professor at the Rutgers School of Law in Newark. Not a bad resume.
Thank you, Joseph. It's a pleasure to be here. So I've really been impressed by the discussion we've heard so far today. It's really been a great conference, and congratulations to Joseph and the other organizers. Well, one of the presentations I was really struck by was the one by Tina Steger, talking about the Marshall Islands. The Marshall Islands brought nuclear disarmament cases in the International Court of Justice against all 9 nuclear powers, and then just because of the way jurisdiction works, actually litigated those against 3 of the nuclear powers, the United Kingdom, India, and Pakistan. It was just a marvelous effort by the Marshall Islands and by their incredible then Foreign Minister, Tony de Bruyn. Much to our disappointment, the International Court of Justice, by very, very narrow margins, as narrow as they could be, ruled that they did not have jurisdiction to go forward to the merits last October. But for those of you who like to dig into things, I encourage you to look at the pleadings that are on the International Court of Justice website for those cases. And so the question was asked of Tina, is there a good pivot in effect for the Marshall Islands from the ICJ cases to the nuclear ban treaty? Well, a very good question. The ICJ cases were about directly challenging the countries that have nuclear weapons. The nuclear ban treaty, I'm going to talk about it, but it's partly just aiming to reaffirm and advance kind of ideals, moral and legal standards, but it does not in and of itself directly challenge the nuclear armed states. Nonetheless, the Marshall Islands is participating fully in the negotiations at the United Nations, but you know, they do it with some sense of reality because nuclear weapons are real to the Marshallese. And the nuclear ban treaty is in part, as I just said, it's partly like a moral and educational effort, but I'll talk about that a little more. So the first UN General Assembly resolution, 1946, sought to set in motion a process to eliminate nuclear weapons and other WMD. The 1950s and 1960s, and really, it was a time of ferment on all sorts of levels. Well, one level was in the international system. There was really rather full discussion of general and complete disarmament, including nuclear disarmament. Then it sort of dialed back. We got the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which was aiming to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, and also committed in vague terms the nuclear powers to negotiate nuclear disarmament. The 1990s, after the Soviet Union disintegrated, we saw a real burst of multilateral disarmament. Chemical Weapons Convention, very elaborate treaty for the elimination of chemical weapons. The Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the extension of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. During that time, and Alyn Ware, sitting right here, was heavily involved with this, people, including a lot of experts who had deep experience with the UN, elaborated a model nuclear weapons convention, which, like the chemical weapons, was a comprehensive scheme for the prohibition and elimination of nuclear weapons. Well, even those of you who are younger know that things kind of started to slide backwards after the 1990s in terms of disarmament and other things. And so the idea of a nuclear weapons convention, even though it had support from the same large number of countries that are now pushing forward the nuclear ban treaty, it wasn't getting much traction beyond that. So in the meantime, the nuclear armed states, the United States, had been putting forward the idea that they were pursuing a step-by-step approach to nuclear disarmament. Well, to some of us, at least, that sounds pretty good. It's like, it's a very serious subject matter. You should have a pragmatic, sober approach to it, but it's not working. And you can also ask yourself the following question. If you're hiking in the mountains and you have to cross a chasm to get to the other side. You want to take a step-by-step approach to that? So that was a question well, I'll figure out who said that at some point. So the Obama administration came up with some fairly modest steps for nuclear arms control, but they ran into a whole lot of resistance, which they didn't seem to want to invest the political capital in to overcome. So now here we are, the non-nuclear weapon states, with a big assist from civil society, said, okay, we're going to take agency. It's our world too, and nuclear explosions affect us too. So they came forward with the idea of a nuclear weapons prohibition treaty, a ban treaty. There's a direct link from the idea of the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention to the nuclear ban treaty. The nuclear ban treaty, in effect, is slimming down the Model Nuclear Weapons Convention so it includes the prohibitions, don't have them, don't use them, but it doesn't include, essentially, the provisions about disarmament, verified disarmament. And so the non-nuclear weapon states said, we're going to go ahead with this process with or without the nuclear weapon states. And interestingly, I think the world is shifting in more ways than not only the rise of authoritarianism, but China's playing an interesting role. China showed some interest in participating in these negotiations, eventually decided not to. So now it's basically an initiative of the Global South countries, but also including Austria, Ireland. So the negotiations are taking place now. They'll conclude July 7th. You can follow them on reachingcriticalwill.org. There's also a UN website which you can find under the United Nations Office for Disarmament Affairs. The treaty itself has general obligations. So each state party, the draft treaty I should say, it's now being discussed, each state party undertakes never under any circumstances to develop, produce, manufacture, acquire, possess, or stockpile nuclear weapons. It has provisions about victim assistance and environmental remediation. Now, a question was asked about these obligations earlier today. I don't know if they're going to survive into the final version of the treaty, but if they do, I think they'll probably cover both past and hopefully events in the future which don't happen. The ban treaty draft also wants to signal to nuclear armed states and also to allies of nuclear armed states that they are welcome to join the treaty. Well, this is complicated, of course. Actually, I should say extremely complicated in the case of countries that have nuclear weapons. How would you set it up so they could join this treaty even though they are refusing to participate in its negotiation? But nonetheless, part of this is, it's like an exercise in good faith. This is the kind of world we want to live in, and we're inviting you to join us. And there are a couple of basic paths. One is sort of taken from the model of South Africa, which had a small nuclear arsenal, gave it up, joined the NPT. One path is that a country would eliminate its nuclear arsenal, join the nuclear ban treaty, and then sort of demonstrate to the International Atomic Energy Agency that it had in fact eliminated its nuclear arsenal. The other path, and this is where it gets kind of complicated, would be to try to structure the treaty so it could be the nuclear ban treaty, so it could be the basis for a supplementary agreement that would involve the verified irreversible elimination of nuclear armed states' arsenals, and then they could join the treaty, or possibly they would join the treaty and then, subject to monitoring, eliminate their arsenal. So what is the significance of this effort? it is too early to know. First of all, we have to see if a completed treaty comes out of this process. If I'm asked to guess or predict, I would say yes, but we'll see. Secondly is how much is it going to require the member states to do? Let me criticize a little bit the states that have been pushing this treaty. They should be ready to take on really affirmative obligations that require them to do things they're not already doing or refraining from doing. I'm talking about prohibitions on transit of materials and equipment and components across their territory. I'm talking about prohibitions on financing of nuclear weapons manufacture, disarmament education. So will this treaty, assuming it comes into existence, will it be a statement of moral and legal standards? Will it allow the non-nuclear weapon states to join together as a potent collective actor? Will it be, as many hope and believe, truly a transformational paradigm? Well, the proof will be in its evolution. But I think for new generations, for publics and advocates in nuclear armed states, it will, at a minimum, it will be a powerful statement of expectations, and we should make use of it.
John, thank you for that very clear overview. Very, very helpful. The next speaker, I have to say, I don't know anybody who brings more energy to the campaigning for nuclear abolition than Alyn Ware. And with the modesty that a number of other panelists have here, he used to introduce himself simply as a kindergarten teacher. Alyn is a peace educator and activist from New Zealand. He was one of the leaders of the successful campaign in New Zealand to prohibit the presence of nuclear weapons, and then globally to achieve a ruling from the International Court of Justice on the illegality of nuclear weapons. Alyn is a co-founder of Abolition 2000, as are several others in the audience here. He's the co-founder of Unfold Zero and Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, for which he serves as the global coordinator. He has received a number of awards, including the UN International Year for Peace Award and the Right Livelihood Award, and has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Alyn, take it away.
Thanks, Joseph, and thanks so much to Brooklyn Friends Meeting for hosting us here in this beautiful space, which with the windows open, we actually got some fresh air in, which is lovely. I'm particularly thankful to Friends and Quakers, because Friends and Quakers in New Zealand what support me to come over and to hang out over in the Northern Hemisphere and to participate in peace actions. It's a little bit far to go home, so that's why I'm hanging out in the Northern Hemisphere. We have a few other Kiwis, New Zealanders, who have come over for the ban treaty negotiations, but they're not here today. They give their apologies. They were doing some preparation for the negotiations. But it's great also that AFSC, the American Friends Service Committee, I think were the ones that, along with Western States Legal Foundation, came up with the notion of Peace and Planet, of the idea that as the nuclear abolition campaign, we needed to make the connection with these other issues, the issues of war prevention, of social justice, of climate protection, sustainable development. These issues are so important to make the links. And the fact that all of you have come here today in this heat is a testament to understanding that these connections are really important and that they can strengthen our movement. So thank you again for that. I'm really pleased to come near the end, because I think we're looking a bit now, not just at what the ban treaty is, but beyond the ban. You know, what next after it's adopted? And John's sort of given a little bit of a taste of this. What impact might this have on those that possess the nuclear weapons, and those that rely on the nuclear weapons, because these are the ones we really have to change if we want to eliminate the weapons. It's really important what the non-nuclear states are doing. It's really important that they will strengthen their commitment to a nuclear weapons-free world and reaffirm the norm of prohibition of nuclear weapons. But we also then need to say, what do we do next? And that's where I think this gathering is so important. I want to just reflect a little bit on the experience from my country, New Zealand, because we are a country that was very pro-nuclear. Very pro-nuclear. When the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, New Zealanders were dancing in the streets. We believed that was the end of the war, that we were going to be next. Japan had already started the invasion of Australia, and we were next on the list, so we felt that saved us. Then, when the Cold War progressed, we were right in behind the United States, France and the UK. We supported the nuclear tests, we welcomed their weapons into our harbours. We even had one of our prime ministers said the mistake that the United States made in Vietnam was their unwillingness to use the ultimate weapon. This was our country. And it wasn't just on pro-nuclear weapons. We were pretty pro-war. Our country got involved in just about every war we could, whether it was the Boer War, the Malaya War, the Korean War, the First World War, the Second World War. None of these were in New Zealand. They were all in other countries. Did I get them all? The Vietnam War. We were like, you know, like the real little dogs often have the biggest barks and the ones the most vicious. We're like that. We're a little country, you know, forgotten down the other end of the world. We wanted the big bark to show, hey, we're up there with you. We're up there with the big, powerful countries. It was part of the status. It's part of this, like, belonging. It's part of thinking that you're going to have better political relations and trade relations if you go and fight wars with these people. So we were pretty aggressive. So to turn that around was actually quite something. Now it looks as though, oh, New Zealand is a peaceful country, you're always peaceful, but it's not true. We were a pretty aggressive country, and we're very pro-nuclear. The humanitarian impact of the nuclear tests was one of the critical issues that helped turn that around. But it wasn't the only one. And in fact, it wasn't the main one that got us to be nuclear free. It was the one that raised people's attention. You know, knowing that these nuclear weapons are so horrific. Not just what happened at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but what happened Marshall Islands and what was happening still in French Polynesia with the tests. But that only convinced less than half the population of New Zealand. What really moved the country was the security arguments. The security arguments, I think, are so important to winning the debate with the Allies and the nuclear weapon states, where they say nuclear weapons protect us because the threat of us or our friend, the United States, using them on our behalf will deter this enemy, whether it's Japan or Indonesia or the Soviet Union back then or Russia now, is actually illogical. In fact, if you have the nuclear weapons, you become a target. And when we started reversing the logic and talking about real security issues, then we got all the people in the middle, and even some of the conservatives go, oh, maybe those nuclear weapons aren't so good. So we used that argument. We also said, look at the conflicts that we are having. We had a conflict with a very aggressive country, Indonesia, that occupied a very small country. It was waging a horrific occupation there, with, we don't know, maybe 20% of people killed in East Timor through that occupation. Nuclear weapons weren't doing anything to resolve that situation. The nuclear tests that France was doing in the Pacific was violating our sovereignty with the radiation. Having the United States, our ally, was doing nothing to stop the French nuclear tests. The US was cooperating with the French on those tests. We started using more the other mechanisms for these key security issues, the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. We took a case against France on nuclear testing, and it was that that pushed France to stop testing. It was the United Nations working cooperatively that managed to end the Indonesian invasion in East Timor. It wasn't nuclear weapons. So if we now fast track forward to where we are now, the ban treaty is very good. The humanitarian argument is very good. But it hasn't, neither of those are going to convince the nuclear armed states or their allies to give up nuclear weapons. We do need to engage in the security arguments. And there's a fantastic resource for doing that. And Tim's at the back of the room here. You can get probably signed copies from him today, seeing he's here, Disarming the Nuclear Argument. And he takes on the arguments that the Allies and the nuclear weapon states use for justifying the nuclear weapons, and he demolishes them. So I recommend that. But the arguments are not just enough. Oh, sorry, there's copies out in the back. Tim, stand up there. This is the one. Great book, just come out, hot off the press. But it's not just logic that's going to win the day, because there's a lot of politics involved. So that's where it's also, I'm going to say 3 more aspects that I think are really important. Politics, process, and money. Politics. This is where engaging with legislators is so important, particularly parliamentarians, because they are the ones that are making decisions on these security issues in the Parliament. They influence policy. One of the ways we managed to shift the policy in New Zealand was because we worked with parliamentarians from all political parties. We managed to get a small group in the Conservative Party to actually start agreeing with us. And it took them a while. It took them like 6 years really to change the policy of the Conservative Party, but they were able to do it. So now our nuclear-free policy is cross-party. Every political party supports it. So it's really important to work with your parliamentarian, regardless of which political party. You might think maybe it's a Republican, you've got no show. Well, I've actually met an incredible Republican who's like right-wing on so many things, but we've managed to get him to agree to a process for nuclear disarmament and supporting multilateral nuclear disarmament negotiations, a Republican, Senator Roger Wicker. How we managed to get to move him was because he's the chair of the Peace and Security Committee of the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, a body that's designed to look at cooperative security and law and resolving conflicts, not threatening others. So working with parliamentarians is very important. But that's not enough. There also needs to be a process to feed into. And we have one next year, a very important process. The United Nations will be holding a high-level conference on nuclear disarmament. This is not just a meeting, this is a high-level conference. High-level conferences are when governments expect that there's going to be something achieved. It's not just a talk shop. For example, we just had the UN high-level conference on oceans 2 weeks ago. The first high-level conference on oceans. It was incredibly successful. They adopted a 14-point action plan to protect the oceans. We had a high-level conference on sustainable development. It adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. So next year is the high-level conference on disarmament. We can push now the Allies and the nuclear weapon states to go along and push them to adopt measures. We can also highlight the ban treaty at the high-level conference. Lastly, money, and I've only got 50 seconds to talk about it, but it's the most important probably because money is what makes the world go round. When we adopted our nuclear-free policy, the United States tried to stop us by launching an economic boycott, but we thwarted that. Actually, it was US women who thwarted that by launching the Girlcott campaign. Girlcott is the opposite of boycott. So there were women all around the United States going out asking to buy New Zealand nuclear-free butter and New Zealand nuclear-free ice cream. Trade between New Zealand and the United States doubled over the next 5 years, thanks to the Girlcott campaign and the publicity. I think we can do the same. We've got the weapons corporations are incredibly powerful at the moment. They're dominating the Congress here. Ed Markey's bill in the Senate to slash the funding for nuclear weapons can only get a handful of Democrats on board. But what we're launching is a worldwide nuclear divestment campaign. In our country, we've done it. We got our public funds to divest from nuclear weapons, and their performance rating has gone up to like the top in the world. If we can use that argument on other public funds with all these countries that are signing on to the ban treaty, regardless of whether or not it specifically prohibits financing,
we can use that ban treaty to encourage them to get their public funds to divest from nuclear weapons. We can give the experience that the performance of those funds will probably increase, and so that will give economic argument, and that will then help to support President Nazarbayev's initiative, which is to cut military spending and put it into sustainable development goals. So I think we've got some really good things to move after the ban treaty that can have impact on the nuclear armed states and allies. We've had experience that it's worked in the past, and we look forward to working with you from down under New Zealand with everyone else in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alyn, for giving us some vision of where we may be going. I want to hold us to time. Among other things, we're limited how long we can be here in the meeting. Our Japanese guests need to hold the meeting among themselves before we leave, so I'm going to try to keep our time tight here. I apologize for that. And simply to say, after we break, people are welcome to meet downstairs, talk with the speakers, and do the networking that's essential to a conference. I'm going to take maybe 3 questions, but we'll take the questions first, and then turn to responses. So I want to get people who haven't asked questions before. Gentleman here, Mark in back. And we can't do 3 men. Yes, ma'am. So, yeah, 3. I'm sorry. Go ahead. John.
Could you address U.S. imperialism and the role nuclear war plays in maintaining U.S. imperialism? It seems that we need to address that's the motivation to keep nuclear war on the table. So,
Mark, you can introduce yourself when you come up here too.
Excuse me. Hi, Mark Harrison with the United Methodist Church. I wanted to ask some questions to the U.S. folk here. Because I came here trying to understand what is it that we can do since the U.S. government will not support this treaty. How do we organize to get congressional groups to support the treaty, like the Progressive Caucus? Can we do issues in the 2018 election to make it an issue? How do we want to play on that? And some of the other major groups who could endorse such a treaty. Thank you.
We have a publisher from Vermont. People can't hear you, so if you could come up.
Okay. Hello, y'all. My name's Robin Lloyd from Burlington, Vermont. I'm working with a young man there who's involved with Posse Ibene and waging nonviolence. We're looking at the time between Hiroshima Day and Nagasaki Day as a kind of, how to say it, a sort of sacred time for commitment to abolishing nuclear weapons. And we are planning to, from sunrise to sunset, have a presence, maybe beating drums, maybe just meditating and having a space probably near our airport where the F-35 airplanes are due to come in a couple of years, which are nuclear capable fighter jets that are already causing hundreds of houses to be demolished because these jets make such an outrageous noise. And it's taking place in our airport that's in the municipal area. So I'm just bringing this up as a suggestion that we can all consider more actions this year for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Also that there's a campaign that a friend of mine is working on, Ellen Thomas, that getting Eleanor Holmes Norton, who has proposed this bill into Congress for years, It's to abolish nuclear weapons and use the money for environmental purposes. And every year she tries to get more people to join, and I would, do you have the name of that, oops, there she is. She just has to say a word or two here. She is so committed on this issue.
I'll be quick, I'll be quick. It's the Nuclear Weapons Abolition and Economic and Energy Conversion Act. It was first introduced in 1994 after the people of Washington, D.C. passed a voter initiative. It's asking the United States to take a leadership role in negotiating a nuclear weapons ban treaty, and also what Robin mentioned. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin and Ellen. We've got our 4 speakers who would like to answer questions. Maybe John might begin talking about what we can do in the land of imperialism, and others may want to talk about imperialism as well.
You know, a lot has changed over the several decades since 1945. One thing that's changed is that some governments around the world have come to see nuclear weapons as being important to their defense. Talking about Russia, talking about Pakistan. In other words, nuclear weapons have become entrenched in the ideologies and national security doctrines of a number of countries around the world. So it's not just, obviously, it's not just a problem with the United States. This question of the role of nuclear weapons in U.S. policy is a big one. So the only thing I will say about it is that it is at least a background factor in U.S. power projection, but it is by no means the only problem we need to overcome in the global abolition of nuclear weapons. Now, a very good question is, what can Congress do in relation to nuclear ban treaty? First of all, we need a nuclear ban treaty. If there's one that's adopted July 7th or soon after, then we really need to come to grips with that question. But for example, there could be a resolution proposed in Congress that would welcome the nuclear ban treaty. And great to see Ellen Thomas here. It's really marvelous that this legislation on economic conversion and nuclear abolition gets offered year after year.
Okay, thanks. The first question seems simple, but it's probably one you could have a 3-day conference on, the role of nukes in US imperialism. I'd say, you know, US doesn't actually need nukes to be imperialistic, but yes, there is a connection between the nukes and imperialism. We experienced that in New Zealand. But one thing I want to say is how we were successful is we tried to not confront that head on. I mean, the head-on in New Zealand, it was through ANZUS, the Australia-New Zealand-US alliance. Over in Europe, it's through NATO. And if you only do like no to ANZUS, which is one of the campaigns we did have in New Zealand, or no to NATO, it's going to be very difficult to win that argument in the short term. Because in Europe, the majority of the countries that are in NATO and the majority of the populations want to stay in NATO. What we did instead, rather than making it into an anti-US, we made sure it was anti-nuclear, and that we had friends in the US, and we had congressional members in the US who supported New Zealand's nuclear-free zone. And I think it's better to highlight the positive and highlight the alternatives. You can still criticise the existing imperialistic tactics, but that's going to be a really, really difficult battle. Which is why I think it's really useful to highlight the OSCE, the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Here we have a body Russia is part of, Ukraine is part of, the former Soviet countries are part of, the US and the European countries, that is designed to work on resolving conflicts, designed to work on upholding human rights, designed to work on upholding law in the interactions between these countries. So I'd say elevate that more. When a security question comes up, don't get caught in the debate of either NATO is bad or NATO is good all the time, because that's a really difficult debate to win. But you can win the OSCE debate easily, partly, of course, hardly anyone over here knows about it. So you're actually raising something positive that could work that they don't have the arguments about. So that's one thing. On the last, on the Alyn Holmes-Norton, she's one of our members, as is Ed Markey. PND, our network of parliamentarians, is all around the world, but in the US we have a range of parliamentary members and we have a range of initiatives. So we support the Alyn Holmes-Norton one, the same bill. Markey's also got the Markey-Liu bill, which is to make sure, take away the power from the president to unilaterally launch a nuclear war. So if you ask your legislator, legislator to join PND, and we have a whole range of initiatives that they can support there, whether those are in the United States or any of the other countries. Thank you.
Arielle or Takai, would you like a last word?
So, just to say that I fully agree with what has just been said. When we have, it's such a big issue already, nuclear weapons, and it's such a great step that we have, almost prohibited them, at least with a legal framework. And so I'm convinced that this is really the first stone on which we can build the way toward their elimination. But if you think about the big mountain that is, putting down imperialists and changing the whole system, I'm sure this elimination of nuclear weapons is going strongly to contribute to it. And working on that, I think we will also learn a lot against the military-industrial complex, and we will learn a lot on how to unite and address major security issues in this world. So I'm confident that building together on the Ban Treaty, we can really achieve major challenges in the future. And about August 6 and 9 this year, they are going to be very special, because it will be it's like the voice of the Hibakusha has been heard. The nuclear weapons are officially banned this year. So I think we should really do big things wherever we are, or small things if we're just a few, but we should really do it together.
I thank the friends who spoke about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki Day's actions. And the two things I want to say is that, the first one I forgot to say in my first remark. For many years we initiated the signature campaign because we believe that the nuclear disarmament is an issue involving everyone's life. So if you want to protect your life, you need to be involved in any action. And the signature campaign is something you can do anywhere, any place, if you have any will. And this time, but we didn't initiate that because Hibakusha started the campaign. The aim is, because of the initiation by Hibakusha, no one can resist. Now there's a change. Even the mayor of Hiroshima came to join us in the street campaign. It happened in Nagasaki too. He came to join the street campaign, appealing the residents to sign. And the governor of Hiroshima came to join. I want our campaigners to spread this experience all over the country. All mayors invited us, mayors and leaders, local leaders, whose responsibility is to protect their people. And I want to invite you to join us in this campaign to form the pressure, uniting ethically all of the 7 billion people. And one point to add is, one famous Hibakusha who died shortly before he died, I asked him to give us a message to young people assembling the World Conference. And he said, most important thing is continue your effort. That is what has brought the world to this point. That is the most valuable effort. So please continue your efforts. I think that is the most important message for us. Now we should take that. Thank you.
Thank you, Taka and Arielle. And I don't have good words to wrap this up. I think we've had an incredibly rich afternoon, and I think we all know that this is food for the soul. It's food for the intellect. But what's most important is what we do tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, and do the organizing. Most important is to get out and educate and organize and act. Last thing I'll say, if we think that our lives, our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives, our friends' lives are important, right? Are of value. The question is, what are we going to do to help ensure that they can live with security, with no fear of injustice, and in a society that's sustainable and is respectful of all people and other countries. So the question is, how do we live out that set of values? And part of it is to use your imagination and press to your limits. Thank you so much. And then I just have to say, then the organizer in me has to say, I love you all, but I want to hold this space for our Japanese guests, and we need to be efficient in terms of time. Thank you.